Welcome back. We are continuing one of the most important conversations of this year, I suspect, and that is our interview with Brigadier General Robert Spalding, United States Air Force retired. If you've caught the first segment, you've already established, I think, how formidable a man he is. If you haven't, I encourage you to go listen to it on the podcast of your choice. But what we're going to talk about now is arguably even more important, which is how has our country, specifically our financial sector, been using your money in the form of investments you make in Wall Street to actually underwrite and enable and make more powerful and deadly the unrestricted warfare being waged against us by China? General, you have been tracking this kind of problem for some time. You served as the defense attaché I mentioned earlier in China. You've seen firsthand the impact of the money, the trillions of dollars that have been migrating from our country, thanks to people like Larry Fink of BlackRock, into the coffers of the Chinese Communist Party through their various front corporations. How bad a problem is that? And how serious is it that it's continuing despite what you and others are warning about, and that should be now common knowledge about the true nature of the Chinese communists and their agenda?
Well, the true nature of unrestricted warfare is to garner proxies within the target states. And, essentially for these two PLA colonels, the two proxies that they were trying to garner was the U.S. financial institutions and the corporate sector. And they've done a very, successful, had a very successful effort at that. You might think that, hey, two military officers wouldn't be writing about economics, trade, and finance, but these two PLA colonels were exceptional in their understanding of globalization and the internet, and particularly how to weaponize those two things to gain advantage for the Chinese Communist Party. One of the issues that we have and that they mention within unrestricted warfare is an individual named George Soros.
Oh,
So,
yes.
in particular, they were talking about the Asian financial crisis and the role of Soros in precipitating that event. What they saw that needed to be done within China is to protect the financial system from attack. That's why the Chinese today have a non convertible currency and strict capital controls. You'll never see their currency float. And that's one of the reasons that the PLA colonels gave for creating this financial system is this ability to have a financial attack. Now, what that means is that the Chinese Communist Party has created this fish trap of a financial system which allows capital to flow in, but doesn't necessarily allow capital to flow out. Now, this can be advantageous, particularly in the case, for instance, of Russia invading Ukraine. If you want to cut them off, as the United States and allies have done, now you see a collapse in the ruble, which tends to dissuade or deter those adversaries from taking those actions. Well, China's created this system that where they can't be dissuaded or they can't be deterred because the People's Bank of China is the only entity allowed to actually transfer yuan or renminbi for dollars. It's a very
Mhm.
powerful system. If you want to see how this is operating in effect today in our own political system, you can just read the article recently about the Semiconductor Industry Association. Now, they stand to gain, the semiconductor industry, $40 billion of U.S. government funding to create infrastructure here in the United States, manufacturing capability for the semiconductor industry. Yet in the bill, there has been written in this effort to prevent the semiconductor industry from investing in China. They have been fighting. So imagine our own Semiconductor Industry Association fighting to receive, on the one hand, $40 billion in investment from the federal government, and on the other hand, prevent in that same bill, preventing them from, investing in China in a similar fashion. So this is the power of unrestricted warfare to use our own industry and companies and financial institutions against us.
Let me make sure I understand this. I get that this, I think it's called the USA Compete Act, is going to be pouring an awful lot of money into trying to wean us off of Chinese and Taiwanese and other foreign silicon chip manufacturing um, supply chains. But you're saying that they want to preserve their ability to continue to do business in and with China. Is that something that is being enshrined in this bill as well?
Not just do business, to actually invest their money. So
My
while the
lord,
federal government is pouring money to invest in their business, they're pouring their money to invest in China. It's only in
this is
America and
insane.
only in unrestricted warfare could you see this kind of
Yeah,
behavior.
and only in an elite captured society, and that is, of course, as you say, at the core of this. Our friend Peter Schweitzer has written a terrific book on the subject of this phenomenon at the hands of the Chinese, called Red Handed, and it's a nice companion, I think, to your new book, War Without Rules, General. Let me ask you, you have spent a very substantial amount of your professional life of late working both before you left the military and since on one of the main lines of attack of unrestricted warfare, namely the Chinese effort to build out its information technology infrastructure, I guess, for want of a better word, specifically Huawei as a prime mover behind this whole 5G global infrastructure network. Talk about where we stand with that, and do we have an alternative now? You, among others, raised the alarm about it during the Trump years, but how are we coming in terms of having something that we could do instead?
Well, Huawei has done phenomenally well in spite of the fact they've been cut off from semiconductors here in the US. In fact, they just reported record earnings in spite of that fact. So that gives you some idea about the Chinese Communist Party's ability to wean themselves off of semiconductors from the US and create their own ecosystem within China. So, in terms of 5G, though, we've been entirely too focused on the radio access technology component of 5G and less focused on software defined networking, network function virtualization, and software defined gateways that find themselves in the core of the network. This is something where the United States really could have an advantage if they thought differently about the architecture. We're moving from a world where we have highly centralized, hyperscale data centers where we process most of the back end data for smart devices. But we are moving with the introduction of 5G to a world where we have these edge computing nodes, which are out there and disaggregated and separated from these hyperscale environments. Hyperscale means big, fat, juicy targets. Disaggregated computing means that you have your capability disaggregated and spread out throughout the nation, making you, if you design it correctly, much more secure and resilient. And I think that's the opportunity we have to take advantage of 5G, not so much from the radio access side, but from the edge compute side, and take advantage of the advantage that the United States has both in software and processing to really get a lead on that. That's one of the things that we're working on, this ability to have edge compute that is EMP hardened, tamper resistant, and focus on providing the most secure and survivable environment for the U.S.
Well, I'm so glad you've made that point at this juncture, because that's a topic that I hope that we will be able to return to uh, for a further discussion of. It's obviously central to our competitiveness. I don't know whether there's any money for this kind of work in the USA Compete Act. They seem to be larding it up with a lot of Green New Deal kind of priorities of the Congress, rather than actually the kind of infrastructure, the kind of technology, software, hardware build out that is going to really make the difference in the competition with China. A competition that is not simply a business proposition. It is actual warfare, albeit a war without rules. General Rob Spalding, I can't thank you enough for your leadership and your friendship and your mentoring. And I look forward to having more of it in the near future. Thank you for your time today, sir. Next up, we're going to talk about that EMP problem with Lieutenant Colonel Tommy Waller, United States Marine Corps Reserves, right after this.